morning, everybody. We're going to continue talking about some of our major projects, which are a far deeper conversation than just things we want to do. I think it's very core to who we are and how we're going to grow in the coming years. Now, quick show of hands, because this is in some ways part 3 in an ongoing thing. We've been talking about this for a while. Our strategy is to talk about a capital campaign for 32 years, and then to the day we started, everybody's been like, just stop talking about it. Here, let's just do it. In fact, we're realizing that it's a meandering path. And that is just sometimes the Spirit takes us in different places, and getting ready and building capacity and doing it right and being ready to start right means there are parts of that, and we're in a kind of pre-discernment phase that we want to take our time, we want to listen, we want to align any major project work that we do with where the Spirit is leading us as a cathedral and a congregation, and to larger questions about sustainability and vision. So with that said, is there anybody for whom this is the first time they've sat in a capital campaign-esque kind of conversation? Or have most of us been here? Oh, wow! Hello, person in the who I've not met. Welcome. So some of this, I've also learned that each time you have a PowerPoint, that PowerPoint might show up in other places. So I try to keep some things for continuity. You will have seen it before, and some slides I'm just going to blow right past. And I took out other things that are just not quite as necessary. So what we're going to be talking about today is a bit of the process, where we are thus far in our conversation around some major projects. And then I'm going to lead us into a conversation on, I'd say, one of the most specific questions that we're looking at right now, which is Cathedral Hall. And even without starting the PowerPoint, I can tell you how all this started. Many years ago, someone said, we need to do something about these windows that are in bad shape. Because they're 100 years old. They're actually more than 100 years old. And gravity is not great for a lot of us, including windows, stained glass windows. In many ways, many of our systems, we have not, in our first century, had to invest a lot of money in the physical plant of the cathedral. It was built well. That's how long things last. But stained glass, we have known for at least a decade or more that we were heading towards a significant project. And over the last 4 or 5 years, a subgroup of our Property and Sustainability Committee has been looking carefully at what the needs are, which led us, to a sense of we know we need to get started, but to a larger question of, okay, not only do we know that we as the congregation today need to step into this place of stewardship and philanthropy, but where else are we being called as a congregation to do some major work? To really carry out our vision, which led to this deeper conversation, starting with the vestry doing some work on scope, on what are some possibilities of things that we think we need to be paying attention to, which then led to the creation of a capital campaign committee. Please raise your hand if you are on that capital campaign committee. We'll name you in just a minute. So good, thank you all for being here. And now we're finding, and with that, I'll kind of hop into the PowerPoint just to share with you the process. Our committee, Howard Lewis and Cynthia Reese, are co-chairs. Welcome. Paul Hergesell, Bill Fuller, Bill DeTiro, Ted Andrews, Pam Myers, Marianne O'Gordon, Jeff Spees, Dave Miano is a facilities liaison, and Cheryl Williams and I are on it. Did I leave anybody out? And they're probably happy I left them out, and then they can sort of excuse themselves from the conversation. Or I can just start adding people in. To refresh, conversations were not just about, let's take care of project A or B, but what are some of our emerging priorities? One is community and pastoral engagement. So that's within the city of Cleveland, and pastoral engagement and pastoral care within within the Trinity congregation. One, looking at our spaces for transcendent liturgy and for vibrant programs. 3, connecting our story to past and future generations, both financially, but also learning our history, learning the deeper story than just sort of, what someone said 3 years ago, what actually happened in 50 years ago and 100 years ago. And then the other is the sustainable resource model for Trinity. We've been spending a lot of time really looking at where we are in the life cycle of our endowment, how we rely on it, what it calls us to, and we're beginning to see some conclusions on what we need to do in order to be as sustainable and vibrant as we can be. And we're beginning to kind of recognize that if we're going to do all the things that we think a cathedral needs to be doing, essentially the things we're doing now, if we're going to inhabit this commons, which we do, the reality is that there is a base level of participation. We need a congregation that is X size, in order to carry that out. And if not, then we recognize that we must pull more heavily from the endowment, or we pretty dramatically change our expectations as a cathedral, right? We have learned a few times that you don't sort of cut around the edges to all of a sudden make everything better. But we are realizing, and that you'll start hearing more about this, I think, of what kind of participation it really calls of us. So stewardship is showing up. Remember that. Stewardship is offering invitations to people who have never been to Trinity. Stewardship is reaching out to people who have perhaps fallen away and inviting them back. That's going to be really essential to who we are. So pathways to sustainability, increased giving through annual giving and congregational growth, grow endowment, staff strategically. We have to be wise about how we manage our work. And then remember that the people are the church. We have to decrease dependence on staff for vital ministry. That's cultural change. Point 1, how do we develop relationship building within the congregation? How do we deepen our connection to the city of Cleveland? We are pursuing that by hiring a third priest. We are in the midst of a search process where we have had a number of candidates, and hopefully in the near future we'll draw that to a close. It ain't over till it's over. We all know that, but we firmly believe that deepening our pastoral care and our community engagement is going to really strengthen our congregation. I'm going to blow past this because you heard that. When we talk about within the building itself, what are some projects that we think about? We've talked about commissioning a liturgical platform. We've talked about stained glass and masonry. We've talked about liturgical vestments. We've talked about upgrades to Cathedral Hall. And when I say upgrades to Cathedral Hall, there's kind of 2 approaches. We all know that it is not fully used right now. And there are 2 approaches that we can think of. Well, 3 approaches. There's always the, we'll deal with it later. Church, we're very good at that, right? There's also the, let's do a really nice paint job, let's get some new furniture, which is not a bad choice, right? That is not a bad option. Let's say that's $100,000. Or there is the vision process, which is we really see that there is great potential in this space, and that we wanted to pursue a more full redevelopment path. And that means putting in HVAC. That means really doing some fine architectural work. And then that puts us, I'm going to say, $1 million to 1.5. These are numbers out in the ether. Well, the $1 million is not out in the ether. That's kind of a baseline. Once we start commissioning the portrait of me up in the corner, that starts getting more expensive. Little mustache. We've really learned through this, things have emerged in this project. When we started this, we didn't know we had a kind of an archive challenge, but we now know that we do, and that our archival materials are an essential part of our stewardship of this community. I would love to be able to read what the dean in 1940 was saying about the Second World War. I would love to see what was said from the pulpit at Trinity during the Civil Rights Movement. And those materials are not available to us. They may be in there somewhere, but we haven't been keeping those. And so that is a part of our history, a really vital one. And so that's going to continue to be a part of our discernment conversation. And then in discernment, life cycle updates. You may have noticed the carpet in here is not the best. Cathedral Hall, we've talked about chapter room, we've talked about everyday spaces, and we've talked about landscaping and sacred garden. So these are all things that are in conversation. One of the challenges to doing this kind of scope work is defining and refining where we're going. There will always be new ideas. And there is a point at which we have to say, we can't get to that new idea right now. We're sort of pursuing this. But there's still a lot of evolution and malleability throughout much of the process. And talk about access to columbarium. I've talked about this. I'm not going to cover the liturgical platform right now. We have talked about system and spaces. This is Commons actually is 25 years old. And a lot of our capital money goes into this space rather than the cathedral space, which is counterintuitive to some people, except that was built on a centuries time horizon. Size systems, many systems cycle through every 25 years, right? So it's time. A lot of our systems need to be replaced. The question is, do we take it into a capital campaign, or do we let that become a part of our budgetary process? Annual budgetary process. And then I'm really excited about this. We have now begun a Trinity Legacy Circle, where we have invited people not only to give or make a commitment to Trinity's endowment with their own current or legacy giving, to do it in the first year to become a founding member. It's a little surprising, but we have not cultivated gifts to the endowment really for the last century. And that is a missed opportunity. What we are finding is that a handful of people are coming up to us and saying, I've already made a gift to Trinity, which is really important. I don't know if that's a recent phenomenon or not, because for the most part, those types of gifts have not been realized over the decades. So now, by inviting people, and we've been so pleasantly surprised, I don't know if we're surprised, but it's wonderful that people have come up and said, I want to do this. I want to be a part of this. Trinity is important to me, and making sure that this is a space for people for decades and generations to come. And so we're only starting. So if you can see, this is kind of where we are starting. How well can you see? It's a little tight, I apologize. This is where we are starting from the wish list of the projects that most often kind of come to the surface. You have stained glass and masonry. That is somewhere to range between $1 million and $1 million. So I think we're going to go with $1 million. That's about what we know. Some people have been working really hard on that, and of course we've begun the project. Liturgical platform, if we were to do it, we still estimate about 200 to 300,000. Cathedral Hall, this is assuming we're actually doing some significant project work between 700 and 900. Might we invite cash gifts to the endowment? Let's say 0 or 250. Do we endow a clergy position or a staff position? That would call for an endowment of $250,000 to $1 million. I don't think we're very motivated to redo the chapter room right now. I think we know that the diocese has kind of a larger picture of the commons, but it's going to take them a few years with us to develop that. So we don't feel like that's a likely priority. We're estimating, if we were to pursue archival space and materials to support it, $150,000 to $250,000. If we were to commission new vestments, 25 to 50, and then the life cycle updates I talked about, HVAC, things that hum and make noises, 275 to 300,000. And so that gives us, if we were to do all of this, then that gives us a range of 285,000 to 348,000.
Wait a minute.
Yeah, just say 0. 1 0, just say it 1 0.
285,000.
2.8 million.
Have I got a deal for you?
It's a minor error. Don't worry too much about it. You can correct it before it goes to the archives.
I think we know I didn't go to school for math, right?
I skipped accounting during
I skipped accounting during seminary. Okay, good. So you guys understand it. You understand zeros, that they matter, yes. So, if we could, all right, someone said show me a Sharpie, and I'll add it up there. $2.8 million versus $3.5 million. What's that?
And the math on that column is also wrong. It's $4.38 million. I'm sorry.
the 3 and the 4.
I knew I had something wrong in here. Okay, PowerPoint gets you again. So it's 4 points. I mean, this is a squishy chart. Right? I mean, we're not going through it. And we already know that, like, I don't think Cathedral Hall is going to be $900,000 if we fully do it. It's sort of looking to me like it's going to be more than that if we really commission it. And so that's, the point is made that this is, you know, the 4.38 is probably beyond our reach at the moment. What is in our reach at the moment? Part of that, we have Cheryl Williams as the development director doing some feasibility work. It will be ongoing conversations, most likely kind of after, I remember I'm going on sabbatical for a bit, back late summer, we'll start resuming more conversations around feasibility, what we're excited about, what we're passionate about. And once we really zero in on what we want to do, we start asking, are there places where there's foundation support? Would the diocese want to or be able to be involved in a Cathedral Hall project? I don't make any assumptions, but I think it's a good question to ask because that would be an asset for the diocese, which, whether or not they help, it would be an asset for the diocese. So let me just pause for I'm going to pause for a moment, and then I want to move us into a more robust conversation around Cathedral Hall itself. So in terms of projects, let's take 2 minutes, scope, process, any questions so far? You all have heard this presentation. All right. What has been really remarkable is in our conversations, we didn't, I think we had kind of an idea of the direction we were going. And we were, I think, kind of inclined, because of the cost factor. Sometimes it's, get something done and patch it up. To think Cathedral Hall is maybe not our top priority right now. Let's do $100,000 worth of improvements and then really do it later on. But what really emerged through our conversation, and really from listening. Remember, we had listening sessions last summer, some focus groups, both among the congregation and the staff and the vestry, around what are the strengths and opportunities of the Cathedral Hall and the surrounding areas, including the hallways getting there and how we get in there from the kitchen. And there was a pretty consistent story that came out of each and every focus group. But when it got to our capital campaign committee, something kind of new woke up. I mean, there was a greater desire to really look at this as something that connects Trinity as a cathedral and as a congregation to the wider community, certainly to the diocese, but to envision Cathedral Hall as a place where sacred things happen. From forums, I mean, we need a space that has 50 to 150 people, to community events, to concerts, to liturgies that can be broadcast via live stream, to spiritual retreats, to dinners to events, all of that. And we first of all, we start, what are some of the Cathedral Hall challenges? Sound, access, the furniture is not great. The use patterns, by that I mean, we've kind of forgotten about it. By nature, 25 years ago, we built this space. It was nicer, it was easier to use. And over that amount of time, you sort of forget that that hall exists. AV is kind of a challenge. Climate control, we've actually gotten better use out of the heating system of late, but of course there's no air conditioning. So it is not a 12-month space. Lighting, age of some of the finishes, the stage, the size, the layout, we really don't use that in the way that it's there. And then how we approach it. The rooms, the hallways are clearly unfinished. Yes, when you come out of the cathedral, you go kind of, you walk out and you're like, do I go down this lit space to this lovely new commons, or do I go down this dark cave to that? And it sort of suggests go that way. And then if you go through back through the stairwell, that's not even finished space, which kind of has a whole message in itself. But there are opportunities. It could be a great hall, to be a space. This is our committee meeting in that space, to reconnect commons and to complete Trinity Commons, rather than having a sense of like, that's the place we don't go to anymore. But really, it's the potential to be congregational space, warm space, frankly, to help accommodate a growing congregation. One that has a strong cathedral identity, one where we can have concerts, chamber music, diocesan and congregational events. I'm no good at math and I'm no good at graphic design. These are just pictures of our committee kind of walking through the space from, obviously, they were up on the stage, looking in the kitchen. This is the hallway. Of course, the chapter room is here. Now, I've learned, how many of you can remember when this was an active part of our Sunday mornings? Right? This was the main event, because I think like the main bathroom was right downstairs.
Well, the two-stalled women's bathroom was there.
The two-stalled women's bathroom was right there. So all roads kind of led through here. And so what we're asking...
There's a plaque in that.
There's a plaque.
With right gifts.
Welcome to Old Two-Stall. But this is unfinished, right? This is a piece that we didn't get to. And it has the potential to be a great connector point that puts the commons kind of at the cathedral hall at more of a central space, but it kind of turns our congregational campus into a two-dimensional space rather than a one-dimensional space. And there may even be potential to reconnect to it through adjustments to the kitchen. There may not be. But this is where our conversation is. And I wonder if I might invite, before I invite, I would love to hear, of course, questions about the whole process. But this is a pretty big kind of moment for our committee and our team to say, are we as a congregation feeling called to greater discernment, which is, we're starting to get to some thresholds to where discernment starts calling for some financial resources from us. And so we're looking in part to the congregation and to the vestry for your input on potential for this, or even concern. So let me start by inviting members of the committee who are here. If you have anything you would add to our conversations around Cathedral Hall at this point.
I think what I would say, just even looking at this picture, the bones of it are fantastic. Here you don't see how crappy the lighting is. It looks like a really nice room, and I think to build on that is really a great investment.
The other thing I would add is that in our discussions, we also have the garden just outside the doors there. And we have a great green space, underutilized and could use some work, but all that in connection with the wall also makes you think about different things.
Bill?
And the abilities we have because of our
commercial kitchen that's attached to that?
Yes.
To accommodate those types of events. It's just, someone's like,
Yeah, we have a good kitchen. I mean, it's not missing pieces. I mean, if anything, the question is, I wouldn't say, do we have too much, or for our current use? But that wouldn't mean a dramatic change, because we need, not only does it serve our particular congregational need, but also makes us available for outside groups, outside vendors, caterers. But I think it's also worth mentioning, because of the location, we don't spend a lot of time in the kitchen as a congregation. At least I've observed. And I think part of that actually has to do with where the kitchen is relative to where we actually spend our time. And that's important for a couple of reasons. It's important because a kitchen is kind of where congregations get to know one another. It's one of the spaces where, everybody kind of knows, like, quick, get Rob, he knows how to work the dishwasher. And now we sometimes have more professionalized needs. But what ends up happening, and this may be just one piece of it, is we start as a congregation to professionalize things that really are volunteer ministries. And it's not even about getting it done. It's about we miss out on the opportunity to build community.
At one point, when we got the new kitchen, we had I forget her name, but she was really good and she helped a lot. But it was locked to all of us.
It was locked?
Yeah, we couldn't get in there. You weren't allowed in there.
Okay.
I could.
So that's an approach.
Yeah, it became professionalized.
And there are seasons when that makes sense. But this connects, when I started talking about, we need to have a threshold, a floor of congregational participation in order to support the level of ministry that we assume, and I think we should, is what we're called to do. And I think that actually, the professionalization works against us, because we stop opening doors for people to come in and get their hands dirty. I was going to say, okay, we're in a kitchen. Okay, well, no, marinating chicken, that's dirty hands. Any other thoughts? Whoops. Okay.
We have to be always cognizant that a very significant ministry happens in that room on middays and Sunday.
Yep.
And our feeding program is just I go back there most every time I'm here. One, to pray for those people, but two, just to see the extent of the ministry. And it's real. And, it's up and down in terms of size. But one of the immediate concerns the committee dealt with is, okay, wait a minute. We have this active ministry in this room, so all considerations and everything that's going to happen has to start with this can't be disturbed. Or if we displace this, where are we taking it to and what are we going to do with it? So the congregation needs to have great comfort that this feeding outreach program remains untouched no matter what happens.
The way what I'm opening up here is we've created what is called a program, which we share with architects, and we begin a process to say, how do we name all these things that are important to us? This is a draft, this is still a work in progress. And it starts with phrases like, we seek to create a great hall that serves as a principal program space, dining room, retreat center, and reception hall that extends the radical hospitality of Trinity Cathedral. And one of the places, to Howard's point, is it needs to be a dining room, but a very special one. And the phrase that we worked with was a dining room that offers radical hospitality, a space that is part of the experience, like the room is a part of the experience of the meal. Whether we're serving congregational, diocesan, neighborhood, or community members. So our approach is neutral on how exactly we do the meal from 12 to 1, but it assumes that this is a space, this remains a principal space through which we offer that kind of hospitality, though along the way we may find ways that we better meet the needs of the community through this project. Through this process, but we don't assume any changes. And I'll tell you what, I'll keep going with this thought, and then we'll turn it over to you. Just the bullet points of what we're seeking what we would seek from this space if we were really going for the full redevelopment. Update sound quality, HVAC, fully ADA compliant so that it is welcoming and accessible to all. A space for forums, events, and speakers that amplifies Trinity's witness of justice, love, and mercy. Immersive, liturgical, and performance space. You have to call everything immersive these days. It's just cool. Which, you know what I call immersive? Church. You know? You're surrounded by the Spirit. A beautiful, multifunctional program space that resonates with the expansive identity of the cathedral. A space that speaks of Spirit. A space that becomes a connective hub within Trinity Commons. That's what we're talking about. That means reconsider the hallway from the cathedral to Cathedral Hall. There are ways that we could transform that lighting and the flooring a bit to really make that a more attractive approach. And then, of course, the hallway that we looked at, a dining room that offers radical hospitality, a gathering place for the cathedral congregation in the Diocese of Ohio, a place of warm hospitality for spiritual retreats and congregational gathering, and a high-quality, mid-sized event space available for use or rental. But we also acknowledge within that conversation that is something that has to be operationalized. I wonder if anybody from our committee could say a bit about how what we're finding is bringing the Cathedral Hall into the conversation more robustly really helps to make this project about mission rather than I have no problem preparing stained glass windows. I think that's our vocation as a cathedral. But we need more. How does this project help us to think about mission? If Jeff.
Yeah, thanks, BJ. And that is a point that has become clear to me. Because when as I've said a couple of times, I knew I'd end up on this committee, but I didn't want to be on this committee. And when I started on this committee, my focus was how do we enhance mission? How do we make this more than bricks and mortar and pretty things? My thought was things about endowing the third priest position or things like that, or some kind of more tangible out there rather than in here outreach basis. And it has become clear to me in the spirit that's happened in the committee meetings that that's the whole point of Cathedral Hall, is that it's been described as our front porch. The first step in what happens out those doors in the garden and the building that shall not be named. That the point, we stood when we took the tour, and there was a magic moment, and you had to be there, so I'm sorry that you weren't. When we took the tour.
We got it on tape, though.
We got it on tape. Yes. There's a little prep nook space right off the Cathedral Hall. And we ended up in there, and we're going to just walk through. It was like, hold on here. And there's windows that lead out into the garden, and I saw it as like, oh man, we could have our little shop for whatever. But it was a transformative moment for the committee to see how the physical space here connects with outreach and into the community and the mission of what we're all about here. Anyway, that was my personal experience with that, and it became clear to me that I was all in. Whether we're all in, we'll see. But
And I think, Jeff, building on that, because we were all standing there in this tiny little
coffee room where the coffee is made and the ice is made, and we store coffee cups, and it's totally forgotten. And there's Bill wondering about that. Yeah, and but those windows look out onto the garden. And I think what that moment brought was, how are we living in these spaces? How are we bringing our spirit into these spaces? And how might we use them? You know, if that room had our, you know, coffee cups, we had chairs in there, we had newspapers, would you come in early, sit down, talk to Howard, chat a bit? How could we live out our lives and our mission in that space? And it's a connecting space between the food and that room. I mean, I'm newer than most to Trinity, but I was always kind of said, you know, and I do other programming with Soul Collage and Labyrinth stuff, but it's always, well, you don't want to use that room. It's like this huge room, and you really don't want to use that. So I think we've gotten into the habit of ignoring it. And I think if you spend time in there, the more time we spend in there, the Valentine thing, did anybody go to that Valentine? It was fabulous, wasn't it? And they put 2 little lights up that changed the lighting in there and had some different tablecloths, and wow, it actually worked. You know, so I think the more in the next couple months, if we can be in that space, using it, thinking about it. For me, one of the amazing moments was standing up on the stage and standing next to that huge stained glass window. And if you have never done that, I encourage you to do it. Be careful, because the stage steps are a little bit weird. And there's that huge chapter room table in there. But it's the only place in the cathedral that you can stand next to such a beautiful window and see the 3-dimensional qualities to it. And it just comes streaming in. And it gives you a different experience of the space. The other thing that Cheryl realized is that that space could technically be probably divided up into other smaller spaces. Like we do have this, that you can divide this up. So we really want to know what you think about these ideas and where you see how we could live there. One of my pet projects, shockingly, is Labyrinth. And we've talked about a labyrinth on the floor in there, that we wouldn't have to keep rolling it up in the cathedral and, you know, worrying about who steps on it and making it available. And that's certainly a possibility, but would add a different element in there too.
I'll turn to the wider community, but also mention, if we move Cathedral Hall back to a position of prominence in this campaign, there's a good chance some of those other things will come off. Right? We're not likely to do everything, and so we're going to do the things that are most impactful and most meaningful to us. So for those of you who are kind of here entering this conversation about Cathedral Hall or about other issues that we're talking about, what's popping up for you right now? Jacob.
Well, as many of you know, I'm a big advocate for the environment, and I think now we're talking about Cathedral Hall. There's a beautiful garden on that wall, and there's some way I would like to see us talk about maybe planning events, having the cathedral hall door open, and then having events in the garden. It won't take much to fix it up, but it's just such a wonderful resource. And we've had a start. There's a plan for a little sustainable garden near the front entrance, which is still in the planning stage. But to also focus on that garden as an entryway, it's a beautiful garden.
Yeah. Tom, you had your hands up.
pre-assume that the use of this space probably falls into congregation, diocese, and the community. Has the committee thought about sort of what percentage would one imagine those three groups might use the space? Or put another way, who really would this be built for?
We are, I think, loosely doing some research. We're not putting, we haven't tried to do those percentages, but we are reaching out, for example, to the events community. You know, Korean Wellness helping us with that to get a sense of like, how would this help this to be a marketable space, or what is the usability? Working with Shiloh to discern, would the arts community be likely using it? I think that's a very good question as we deepen with bring the diocese into it, certainly in conversation with the bishop. And I've invited, you know, please, we'd love to have someone from the diocese be a part of this process because it really is shared space. It's a question we don't have the answer for yet. And it's also a question related to funding. You know, because there could be foundation support, for example, if a lot of this is not just a congregational space, but it's really a community space.
So I have a lot of memories of this space over the years.
Yeah.
And when we first started to go, coffee hour was out in the garden. And we, go out there and have coffee and whatever. That was lovely. Of course, that's a seasonal thing. I remember that when we had the medieval dinners, we would start in that room, and there would be, I don't know, their hors d'oeuvres or whatever, and so something happened in that room for that event. Palm Sunday would start in that room, and the brass and the music would be there, and we'd go out through the garden, around the block, and then up the stairs.
Oh, okay.
And I think I might have been to a wedding reception in that. Bill? Yes? Did we have one? Yes. Yes. So Bishop Bowman's reception after his funeral, all kinds of wonderful memories of community and things like that at Trinity over the years in that room. So I guess, I don't know, it's been years since I've probably done something in that room of that magnitude, but it would be lovely to be able to do that again, to have those things again. So it's very
Karen and then David.
Okay, I think one time I noticed there was a little plaque stating that the woodwork in Cathedral Hall was given by a parishioner from their home in Woodland Heights, which is like, that must have been some home, to have enough woodwork.
Right.
And it's gorgeous. It's something that, okay, we have some memorials there that need to be tended to, enhanced. And because people get a little sensitive when their bibs are tossed out. And, just thinking about room partitions, sometimes it can be pretty ugly. How do we sort of, camouflage them so it looks beautiful and, like it was always part of that space? And, someone might actually, doesn't know much about history, might think, oh, gee, is this what they used in Tudor Store England? And in here, just that kind of, sense of organic design.
Yeah, I think we want to rely on the pros as far as, we're working with architects, we're beginning that conversation, especially if we're going to be spending more than a little bit of money, because it is a historical space. And actually one of the things that consistently came up when we had the focus groups is we like the historical space. So you're not going to, do something that is offensive to the aesthetics of it. And I do really appreciate your point, Karen, there and really everywhere on our campus, is just how are we keeping up with the memorials and knowing the people who did it. I don't know who that family is. I'd love to know the story, but I've seen that as well. And it's true of every kind of memorial, a plaque on the wall. There's a story behind many of these, each and every one of these. And it's funny, sometimes we forget about our history when it's right there on our wall in front of us. So thank you.
Maybe, like, hey, we want to, I've redid the house and this isn't fitting with our design, so how can we get rid of it and get a tax deduction?
Yeah.
Or is it, hey, we really love the church and we want to give something from our heart? Yeah.
And if we're going to do something like the Cathedral Hall, we're not likely to go to Home Depot in an afternoon and pick up the stuff.
Yeah.
So, Damon.
If you're going to put this much if you were to put that much resources into it, obviously you would then want to get the maximum potential out of it. And I think that to do that, you would probably want to look at maybe hiring somebody to manage it because of the amount of work that you go into. Communicating with all these different groups and moving furniture around and taking payments. And I think that would be more than a volunteer or volunteers would probably want to handle. I don't know how many hours a week that would be, but it sounds at least like a part-time job.
Well, while we do, your point is exactly right, because we do have staff that manages certainly the movement of chairs, but the management of event space, it's been a challenge for us over the years. And so figuring out how much staff we have for that and where we need to grow, because again, you have to operationalize it or else it cuts into all your other staff. That's a really great point. Was it Tom? And then I thought I saw a hand over here.
Just, I wonder if to the committee, a little time might be taken to think about the lessons that can be learned from 25 years of experience with the Commons, which started out with the idea that it would in fact serve the congregation, the diocese, and the community. And I'm not sure it has always worked out the way perhaps it was imagined 25 years ago. I'm not saying it was better or worse, it just is different. And so a little time maybe thinking through the lessons learned from that 25-year experience may be helpful in designing, again, for who will this space really be for?
Yes, partly to avoid build it and they will come
Thank you.
type of thing. Yes.
Just there was a lot of that in this space.
Tom, that discussion, that item is a continuous one on the agenda.
Good.
It's an important discussion, yes.
Yes. Other thoughts or questions about this?
I'm just wondering about communities that pay and all of that. We're talking about people that will come in and pay to use it or for us. But what about the people that can't pay? I know that sometimes when this building came in, it became more professional and more expensive.
Right.
Other groups couldn't use it because it was too expensive. So, I know we've talked about in our neighborhood partnerships about, Eric maybe doing something with the kitchen with Marion Stern families or things like that would pull people in from the community, which sounds to me like at the base of it what we want to do, very important part.
And that's even just thinking about the Commons. That has been an ongoing challenge that we have begun to talk about a little more, but I think we need to kind of close the deal on how we approach that. And that may be a conversation for Vestry to have a conversation with staff, because I think everything just kind of got lost in the muddle of it. In our staff conversations, I think we've talked about there's full partnership, there's things that we're kind of mission aligned with, and then there's people who are just coming in and paying a piece of space. So when we did the LGBTQ event, State of the LGBT Community a week and a half ago, we were honored that they wanted to do it here. We thought it was a great part, it's aligned with our mission. We didn't charge them, I don't think we can talk about that. However, when someone came in to throw a massive birthday party the next weekend, we arranged for a contract event manager to help do that, and we simply charged a market rate for it. But there's a lot of, I think the question might be, is figuring out what the whole commons, what our standards are for that. Like, what is our rate for people just using the space? What is our rate for community partners that some rental might be appropriate? And then what are situations where like this is what the commons are here for. We want you to, we want there to be a Narcotics Anonymous group. We want our biggest partner is Neighborhood Development Leadership Partner. They are well funded. They pay rent. It's a reasonable rent. But then there are some groups that we just want to be able to give space to. So I think that there's, as I'm speaking, I think we probably need to have more conversation about the whole campus, about where we charge, what we charge, where we give breaks, and where we don't.
And how accessible our existing spaces are during the week for congregation members who want to have meetings or who want to, we have a new circle ministry starting, and there are other groups that, want to get together. Oftentimes they can't meet because we don't have space. So how are we responding to that versus, it's a dance.
Right.
But I think we do need to pay attention to that though too, because it's sad.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a loss. If people don't, this space was built to be a community asset. And if it's too expensive for the community, it's no longer an asset.
Right, and if we want to grow the congregation and we want more people from the community using the space, then we need to figure out how accessible it is. And that's going to cost staff-wise, and it's going to cost scheduling-wise, and we got to think outside the box on that.
And not for nothing, using this as sort of marketable asset did not pay our bills. Like we did not have a business model that made that work. So we might, again, someday, but right now we don't. I'm conscious of time. Final thoughts before we go to church? Howard.
Yes, sir. The elephant in the room, at 30,000 feet, just a common sense statement about Mather Hall. And because that comes up virtually in every meeting we have, and so just you have to have thoughts or questions about it.
And there is an ongoing conversation between the bishop and me. I think we recognize that property development is a massive undertaking, and I think we remain in discernment until such time as the bishop and the diocese and the cathedral and the dean have the capacity to do that right. So we are not yet at that moment, but we continue to be in regular conversation with each other, with Trinity Wall Street, with community partners, though we're also conscious, we're not putting a lot of time right now into chasing unicorns. Finding that one magic group that's going to all of a sudden come in and work. I think there's a larger capacity question, which is coming up with the capacity to actually develop it properly that we're trying to work on. Audrey.
Doing this Cathedral Hall project well will lead us toward doing a Mather Hall project well.
I think that's absolutely right.
And I think the process, our new relationship, which is fabulous with Trinity Wall Street Mission Real Estate Development Group, really brings a wealth of resources, people, funding, model projects that is really going to help make us make smarter decisions and well-informed decisions. So that's really exciting. And we've actually moved forward in that way. It might not feel like it, but we have.
Yeah, it's a long, slow, lumbering process, but yeah. Was there any common sense in that?
Absolutely, and to the point, we are, in our committee, we are focused on what we can have input to, and that's our property. And Mather Hall will run its course and whatever's going to happen. So, but there always seems to bubble up an issue about what about Mather Hall? That's not anything that we have the ability to do.
We have not forgotten it. I have not been able to forget it despite my best efforts. All right, y'all. Thank you very, very much. A great conversation. We will see you You sure? Oh, I gotta.
All right.
Now walk around with like.